We are all immigrants. Everyone. Strangers and foreigners living in a strange land. Bereft of the culture and traditions that once flourished among our forebears. We came from faraway lands, through generations of ancestors long forgotten, and from ancestral homelands, perpetually ravaged by time. For most families, it was an arduous journey, filled with sorrow, misery and pain, but it served to forge them into what they are today. And now they proudly reflect back upon their heritage in order to gain strength for the present. For some families, however, their heritage has been lost to them, and it leaves them upon a shaky foundation. Nevertheless, through the miracle of the modern age, many of these families have been able to rediscover what has been lost, through the power of online research archives and, of course, the burgeoning science of DNA testing. This is a story of just such a family. Come with us as we travel through time. On the Mustian journey.
Our house here, that's the same.
Emotion hangs heavy in the air, as this beloved and well-respected matriarch approaches what was held to be the family home for an entire generation of one of the western branches of the Mustian family. Both patriarchs of the family have long been dead. 30 years have ebbed away, and much has been lost, as this generation slowly fades into memory. But for the last half of the 20th century, this sleepy little town, on the rugged western slopes of the Rocky Mountains, was called home to a generation of Mustians. This is where Christmas was spent, where the 4th of July was celebrated, and where a new generation of children and grandchildren were loved and nurtured. An all-American family in an all-American town known as Grand Junction, Colorado. However, a dark cloud hung ominously over the identity of this family that only recently lifted. For reasons unknown to them and the generations that preceded them, the origins of their ethnic and cultural heritage was a complete mystery, hopelessly lost through the passage of time. As older generations passed on, and younger ones took their place, mere speculation, uneducated guesses, and received legends about where they came from, and what circumstances could have possibly brought them to America, slowly gave way to one overarching theory, which began to take shape and become widely circulated among family historians. As implausible as it may have sounded to many of the family members, given their current cultural circumstances and otherwise seemingly Caucasian European appearance. By the mid-1970s, the prevailing wisdom held that the family had indeed descended from the proud ancient race of people known as the Armenians. Consequently, an entire generation of children grew up believing in a strange dichotomy of a family which recognized virtually none of the considerable ethnic distinctions common to the Armenian heritage, but epitomized rather the standard traits expected to be found in Western European descendants. This overwhelming disparity was surreal, and not the least bit puzzling to the family members. But eventually they just accepted it, with a shrug of the shoulders, and a dismissal of its relevance to their modern lives. To further complicate this narrative, it was believed that two Armenian brothers had immigrated to America at the beginning of the 19th century through the port of New Orleans, Louisiana, in roughly 1805. The story goes that one brother decided to journey to the east and settled in the North Carolina region, while the other brother eventually headed west. However, the story begins to break down severely at this point, because there is absolutely no evidence to support any of these conclusions. Furthermore, since it is known for certain that Mustians living in both Louisiana and North Carolina fought for the South in the Civil War merely a half-century later, and showed no inclination toward Armenian ancestry at that time, it strains credulity to believe that the descendants of these two brothers had already cast off all vestiges of their ancient heritage, married European wives, and had so completely assimilated into the American experience. Also, it is known conclusively that only a minute number of Armenians lived in America prior to the 1800s. But their migration to the US in larger numbers did not occur until the 1830s. Armenians began to arrive in America in unprecedented numbers in the late 19th century, most notably after the Hamidian massacres of 1894 and the Armenian genocide of 1915. The Armenians are a magnificent race of people who have existed autonomously for thousands of years. And apart from the Jewish people, there are few other ethnic groups who have labored so diligently to preserve their ancient traditions, cultural significance, and ethnic identity as they have. Yet, within all of the Mustian family branches, there is not even a hint of such a connection with this noble past and cultural heritage. And so why has this happened? Why would a family cling to such a connection when no corroborative support exists for it? Well, first, we must acknowledge that it is better to cling to something than to nothing. Additionally, it may be that a simple mistaken application of surname etymology is to blame, made by an overzealous researcher. It is true that Armenian surnames are easily recognized by their endings, IAN or YAN, for instance, Kardashian, Erfalian, Topalian, Karapetian, Movsisyan, and Khachaturian. With this rule also comes the rule that their surnames are always characterized by more than 3 syllables. For example, Muradian, Musilian, and Mutafian. Obviously, the name Mustian does come close to meeting these parameters, and it was imagined that perhaps some letters had been removed from the name in order to Americanize it, which often happened. And the name may have been spelled Musician at one time. Regardless, neither name appears in surname databases attributed to Armenians, so it is a moot point. But for all intent and purposes, this unsubstantiated naming convention is probably the sole reason that the family was ever associated with Armenian descent in the first place. However, due to the advances in DNA research and genealogy studies, this can no longer be substantiated. We now understand that all of the major branches of the Mustian family tree in America predate the Revolutionary War and the signing of the Declaration of Independence by over 100 years in some cases. This can be corroborated by reviewing the DNA ethnicity analysis of the members of the family, even hundreds of years later. In the case of the western branch of the Mustian family, who migrated to Louisiana, Texas, and then on to Colorado, their ethnic makeup remains solidly Western European without a trace of Armenian ancestry, 90% from Great Britain, with smaller percentages from Germany and Norway. Additionally, research has shown that prior to their early appearance in America, there are literally hundreds of Mustian family members who lived out their entire life in Great Britain, dating back as far as the early 1500s. Conversely, no evidence of Mustian lineage can be found in Armenia, or in any of their communities in America. Consider also that each of the British-born Mustian men were married exclusively to British wives, whose prominent families go back even further, into the Anglo-Saxon ethnic origins. This trend continued with the Mustian families in America, as would be expected at that time in human history. That ethnic and racial groups married others from the same groups. Interracial marriages were unheard of at this time in America, and it would have been quite unlikely, and even absurd, for an Armenian man in the 1800s to marry a bride of British descent. Yet, this would have to be the case, if we are to believe Mustian heritage descends from Armenia. Because there is not a single example of Mustian spouses coming from anywhere other than Great Britain. In the field of genealogical research, absolute proof of ethnic origins and cultural heritage, going back beyond 200 years, is often difficult to attain. Especially if the family doesn't even know where to begin looking, as in the case of the Mustians. But, the preponderance of evidence in this case is now leaning decidedly away from the Armenian-based conclusion that was previously reached, and more solidly in favor of a new understanding that postulates their descent from Great Britain as being highly probable. Indeed, it would appear now that the Mustians are a uniquely British-American family in every sense. In fact, it is believed that the progenitor of this great southern clan was a British sea captain who docked his ship, the Phoenix, at the Isle of Wight, in Virginia in 1695. A ship that he then surrendered in exchange for a land grant by the King of England. For the majority of immigrant families from Europe, they can confidently assume that their ancestors first walked down the gangway of a giant steamship and planted their feet on a crowded pier in New York Harbor, or a similar port, within the last 2 centuries. They were then stampeded through a processing center, such as Ellis Island, shoulder to shoulder with hundreds of equally desperate, yet hopeful strangers, courageously dreaming of a fresh and bountiful new life in America. However, this historically iconic scene is no longer valid when applied to the forefathers of the Mustian family, as we have just described. While it would not be accurate to associate them with the first arrivals at the Jamestown settlement in 1607, or passengers aboard the Mayflower ships in 1620. This era, known as British colonialism from 1600 to 1775, does more precisely define the time frame in which the Mustians arrived on American soil. But it also paints a vivid portrait of the hearty and adventurous nature of this family's heritage, one that would help to forge the future prosperity of this new nation for the next 400 years. Through the bitter hardships and pioneering work of settling the land, as well as the savagery of the Indian Wars, to the insecurity and upheaval of the Revolutionary War, and brutal heartbreaks of the Civil War against the states. From the westward expansion of the fledgling colonies, to the world-conquering ascendancy of the United States of America, Mustians have served their country with honor, courage, and commitment, even into the modern age in which we live. Mustian men and women have done their duty. They've stood the watch, and they bravely protected the land they came to love and cherish. In the Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines. These patriots proved themselves to be valiant warriors and capable defenders of the American way of life. In every conceivable occupation and walk of life, Mustians have struggled mightily and became successful as fiercely independent entrepreneurs in a variety of endeavors, including business owners, farmers, ranchers, and venture capitalists. Descendants of the Mustian line have excelled as professional bankers, lawyers, doctors, dentists, entertainers, journalists, government officials, business executives, pastors, missionaries, law enforcement officers, and career military veterans. Genealogical research has also discovered that Mustian ancestry has close relational ties to American presidents, as well as British royalty. Indeed, Mustian men have served as barons, knights, noblemen, high sheriffs, church bishops, ship captains, and high-ranking military officers in Great Britain, dating all the way back to the medieval crusades of the 11th and 12th centuries, and the Norman invasion of England in 1066. All of these successes, as well as their devastating failures, beg two very important questions, which this documentary series hopes to answer. Who are these people? And where did the Mustian journey begin?